Welcome everybody. We have an enthusiast from Syria, so the first question for him would be, what is going on in Syria and how do you see, what kind of role are you playing when a reporter from a faraway country comes to report about Syria? What is your role as a media organizer?
Syria, in the beginning of the revolution, was a very dangerous place, especially for journalists, even for a photographer. When you have a camera in your hand, the government force will shoot you and kill you. So always the journalist was very targeted by the government. The government, they don't want the story to get out. And to work in such an environment, it was very difficult. Our role is just to give some information to journalists, take them to places to be protected, and to allow them as much access we can. You have to keep in mind the dangers in Syria, and the snipers and the shelling and the killing going on. From the revolution, we turned out to be more like, at some point, civil war. Now again, like conflict goes all over Syria, not in one area or two, even inside the Alawites were mostly controlled by the government. What's very unfortunately happening in Syria, it's internally displaced refugees. We have around 6 million people are refugees. We have around from the 6 million refugees, we have 4 million outside, maybe 2 to 3 million inside, and these refugees been refugees 3 or 4 times already. So when fighting started in one area, they move to another area, so they move again and again and again. In general, the Syria, it's a really tight zone in Syria. It's around 100 to 200 dead every day. And so far, the rest of the international community failed to do something about Syria. They allowed the criminal Bashar al-Assad regime to kill as much more people as they can, and they never did anything to stop him.
Boštjan, you went to Syria a few times. Now we are missing 62 colleagues who have been abducted. Many of them were killed. Activists, journalists, they're the main targets. But who is targeting the journalists? And how do you protect yourself? Is having a field producer from Syria a kind of protection you can have?
Unfortunately, Syria has become a conflict with journalists. It's become historic. And this is always tragic. This is always a disgrace, firstly to the conflict itself, and on the other hand to our profession. Right now, I think the Syrian conflict is not one-off, but probably the one most dangerous for journalists, for our work. And the narration and the background of our work over there has changed tremendously in the last, let's say, 6 to 8 months. For example, 12 months ago or a year ago, it was rather simple to enter northern Syria from Turkey, either illegally or even via the open border crossings. Everybody was able to find a good fixer or a good translator or a driver inside Syria. I'm talking about a rebel-controlled area, mostly FSA-controlled area in that time. It was easy to travel around. It was very easy to talk to people. I mean, of course, it was dangerous because of the regime bombardment of the helicopter strikes. But most of the area a year ago was controlled, especially the villages in the countryside was controlled by the rebels. And it was extremely easy in professional terms to get the story. Of course, it was risky, but we were all able, people experiences to do the story. But things have changed in the last half year, 8 months, something like that. First, the border had closed again, and on the other side, the rebel movement became so fragmented and dominated by the Islamists that we were not as welcome as we were before. The number of kidnappings has risen tremendously. I mean, in this moment, the official number is 62. I think the real number is much higher. I'm not talking about only Western journalists. A lot of Arab journalists from all over the Arab world are kidnapped or abducted. The number is biggest in history. I mean, when I was reporting last time in September, my colleague, my partner, was abducted on a day when I decided, okay, this day I'm going to stay inside, and he was kidnapped on the 4th or 5th checkpoint from Babahao on the way to Kidnap. So he's been, right now, we don't have any news. His name is Mark Magenidas from Spanish newspaper and periodical, and he's been missing for 10 weeks now. There was one phone call. We don't know who called. It was, there was a man who said, okay, Mark is alive, and he's in Aleppo. This is all the news we have. Spanish and also Slovenian intelligence services got involved in the story. They made all the contacts, but we are missing every single information. And on the other hand, lots of journalists from big media, I mean from very influential media, are also being kidnapped in this moment. But because of this so-called media blackout, we don't report about it. I mean, most of them are right now from, I don't know why, but from Spain. And things are very bad at the moment. And on the other hand, things have rapidly changed in the narration of story. In the moment when this Islamist takeover happened, Bashar al-Assad opened the visa regime. He was, in all his darkness and evil, he is still smart enough to know what should have to be done. And what he has done is he's dominating the media narration now. He has stolen, with the huge help of Islamists, the story. And now lots of journalists who are not able to cross the border or are forbidden by their broadcasting services or editors to cross the Turkish-Syrian border are coming to Syria via Damascus, via the manders, via the regime forces, via the propaganda. And they're coming in, and it's the only way to do the story. And somehow it reminds me of my personal experiences with the American editors. I mean, you get one-sided story, but you have to do the story anyhow. I mean, you have to do your best. If you are there, if you have your own sources, you can make some phone calls. You go to the safe houses, you meet people. But in this moment, it's extremely dangerous, not only for a journalist, but for people who meet, people who expose. And I mean, the stories coming out from Syria now are not good. And this is the best possible gift to the regime.
When you know, as a journalist, as a photographer, you can become a story in Syria. It's probably a big burden to go there. What is your experience, Darko? How do you travel? You go on visa, or you go with your abars, you enter Syria illegally, and what is the difference from your own experience?
Well, I did both actually. When I went to the rebel side, I crossed the border illegally through the barbed wire. It was pretty simple, not that big deal, you know. There is a network of people who are able to transfer you. You pay $100, they take you through the hall in a fence. You know, Turkish military would like turn a blind eye. It was easy. Later on, they opened the borders, so you know, I was able to move from Syria, from northern Syria, back to Turkey, backwards and forwards. That was easy. On the other hand, I was recently in Damascus, and yeah, I got a regular visa. I drove from Beirut to Damascus. That was sort of, I had to submit serial numbers on my gear, all the list of my cameras, lenses, tripods, things. It was all checked on the border. I spent like 3 hours on the border crossing. So it really it depends on what side you're working. So it's a completely different story. Basically, when you work in the north, you get the local fixer. I was lucky to have a nice guy who knew the area, who spoke good English, who had good contacts, and it was really easy to work. On the other hand, in Damascus, in the government-controlled areas, nothing you can do without that permission from the Ministry of Information. So first thing you do when you come to Damascus, if you want to do any story, you have to go straight to the ministry. They give you a minder, who is basically the guy who prevents you to do anything that is interesting and who helps you to do boring stories. That's how it goes. There's no way you can operate freely in terms of reporting in government control areas. So even there was this polio vaccination where they started when I was there. It was impossible even to get permission to cover that. If I stayed maybe a couple of weeks longer, I would probably get permission, but you just have to wait. And also it depends on the Ministry of Information. For instance, they decided to make sort of ceasefire between the sides in one of the Damascus suburbs. So they allowed some civilians to go out because the area was under siege for many months, and there was lack of food, lack of everything. So they let the people go out, and then they made a show for the media. They invited media, they invited cameras, they let people see that, photograph, film, how the government people, actually the military treats civilians, in a good manner. So it is a huge difference working on either side.
MaryAnne, you are a photo editor, at Washington Post. What kind of content are you pursuing in the context of Syria war? What kind of angle of stories are you looking for? Who are the authors of the photos? Are these professionals, senior photographers, freelancers? Because a lot of big media, they're sending freelancers, unexperienced journalists to the war zone in Syria, which is the most difficult, I would say, now.
Well, first of all, the Washington Post stopped allowing coverage about 8 months ago, as we were explaining, as my colleague was explaining here. We have a reporter who's based in Turkey, who has been the chief of our bureau for coverage in the Middle East, and we had 2 different sets of journalists that were trying to work across the Turkish border into the rebel areas. And as you both mentioned before, it was quite easy to find access to go into the villages. And then we had 2 very near kidnapping situations, and the Post took the position that we were not going to allow any of our journalists to cross the border. So later this afternoon, I'm giving a presentation here at the conference, and I'm going to show some work that's not yet published, but our latest work is addressing the situation with the refugees. So there, as you mentioned, outside the country, there are over 4 million refugees, Syrian refugees, outside the country. So we just sent journalists to Jordan, to Turkey, and to Lebanon to look at the situation. How are the people managing? Are they living in temporary housing, in camps? How long do they think they're going to stay in the countries where they've landed? How many places have they already been? As you mentioned, sometimes the refugees are internally displaced. They move around in the country away from the conflict zones, and then they move out of the country entirely, and then they've had to move within the country they're in several times, from the first stop until a more permanent position can be found for them. There are some people who have now been living for almost all 3 years in a tent city in Lebanon. So we are trying to give some context to those millions of people by going and interviewing people who represent different groups from Syria and their experience of the people there. Also, the Washington Post requires I'm a photography editor, as you mentioned. We require any photographer that we're working with to have had war zone training before we will give an assignment. So we won't send an inexperienced person on assignment into a zone. They have to take the professional classes that are offered either in the States or in London to understand how to work in these areas, and they have to have that certification. We won't assign them to work in these areas.
Mr. Yasser, when a journalist comes to you, wants to go into the Syria, what kind of stories they are usually pursuing?
Actually, what contributed to all this mess in Syria, some of the journalists, they paid attention to extremists. And 1 year ago, like, very few people were extremists inside Syria. And the journalists, they want to look for interesting story people, so they exaggerate about extremism inside Syria. And that contributed to the whole mess now. That's one thing. The other things, it's some journalists, not professional journalists, go inside conflict zone, they don't know the entourage, they don't know the people, the mentality, and also they become in danger, like what happens to common journalists, they went to the wrong places and they got arrested. The other things, what happened is we get restless. How we get restless? You go to Syria to the north, you say it's okay, no bombing, no kidnapping, so you don't take good care of yourself. 1 hour later, one guy, like an American journalist, he sat in one cafe for over 1.5 hours. He was falling. And after 1.5 hours sitting in one cafe, everyone in that area knew he was there, so he got kidnapped. So it's a lot of these factors goes together, become more dangerous for journalism. The other things we should pay attention to, it's how we deal when journalists get kidnapped. So some people pay money, some people pay other things. We have to have a certain strategy. So extremists or criminals, they don't take advantage of the situation. They kidnap journalists, okay, some people pay a lot of money for that. Other people, they don't pay. So we have to have this kind of strategy or policy. When journalists kidnap, we do these things for all journalists. Not when New York Times pay a lot of money, from United Arab Emirates, they pay a lot of money. So as one extremist told me, journalists like money moving around. So also we have to take care of this thing. It's a lot of things contribute to become Syria a very dangerous place.
There were many discussions whether the media house should pay the ransom or not in the case like this. And they're of course different. I'm sure it happened to me, I doubt it. My company would have paid the ransom. But anyway, Boštjan, do you think paying ransoms in the cases of kidnapping is actually accelerating the kidnappings of journalists?
I think it is a situation for journalists. I mean, it's not only a policy of the newspaper or other media, it's a national policy. There are some countries who never pay ransoms. I mean, political kidnappings in, I don't know, any other kidnappings. There is one thing I would put in mind. I mean, it's so-called one-channel solution. It's exactly what Yasser is talking about. I mean, we have to be focused, we have to have a strategy, and immediately when several actors are involved in solving the problem or putting your man or woman out of the conflict or the kidnapping, fuck it up. You have to have one channel. Either it's with the help of intelligence or with your own sources, with your own people on the ground. Immediately when you have the clash of interests, you endanger your journalists 10 times more, and this is what happened to several of my colleagues. And it was rather, how to say, openly explained by Domenico from La Stampa and Pier Pincinin, who was interviewed by our journalist a couple of weeks ago, how it should work and how it's working on the field. And there, as I said, in this moment, there are so many different actors on the field and so many different interests that it's nearly impossible to follow this one channel line. And that's why most of the journalists are staying in the country, kidnapped. And let's be fair enough. I mean, lots of journalists have been imprisoned in Damascus even before things in the north have changed and are still in Damascus, in the prisons. I've interviewed one guy who was just released after 12 months in the regime prison, who was tortured, beaten, raped, all possible darkness happened to him. And he met several Arab journalists in the prison in Damascus. They were all on the edge of dying. Nobody's reporting about the Arab journalists who are kidnapped and being tortured in this moment. Again, it's happening this tsunami and typhoon syndrome, where Western life is valued 100 times more than a life of somebody who's not white. And we are guilty for that as well.
We are talking about, actually, in the context of war in Syria, about the consequences of the war. But where is the cause of the war? How can you catch the cause of this bloody war into the lenses that from your experiences? To tell the whole story.
Well, you can't really catch the cause of the war in the lens, but in order to be able to do the story, you have to sort of see kind of big picture. You have to have some sort of understanding of what is actually going on here. Why is this all happening? Who are the warring sides? Is that only Syrian war, or maybe there's outside influences to this war, outside industries? And in Syria, there's really so many sides that are interested in the development of the situation there that it's not easy to explain to average reader, to average consumer of the news what's exactly going on. I mean, when you look at it's really a multi-layered thing. Locally, we see the warring sides, okay? We see the government, we see some minorities like Kurds, Alawites who are fighting for their own cause. You have the mostly Sunni rebellion, which is also fragmented to different sides, and then you have the Hezbollah involvement, Iranian involvement, Russian involvement, Saudi involvement, Qatari involvement. You have so many Tunisians, Libyans fighting there, and then there is Turkish interest, and then the Western interest after all. So it's all very confusing for an average person who is not interested in a detailed story. So even for the people even for highly educated people who live in Syria, who read newspapers, who see things on the internet, who participate in social networks, it's also difficult to understand the actual cause of the war. I mean, some can say, yeah, the system, the Syrian political system is so corrupt that it deserved to be destroyed by revolution, and the new system, which will not be corrupt, should be imposed with the help of the West, with the help of Saudi, with the help of Turkey. But there's also other side of the thing. I mean, okay, the Syrian state and the system of the Syrian government is multi-ethnic and multicultural, multi-religious system. And however, Assad's government, or previous Assad the father's government, was tough on his own people, it was still multi-ethnic and multicultural, multi-religious society. I don't think that in the future we will be witness of Syria as the multi-ethnic and multicultural society. So it's all black and white, there's a huge gray area in between, and we'll see in the future what happens.
May I say something? The Syrian revolution started when 15 children took them from school because they wrote on the wall, down with Assad. So the regime took them inside, they tortured them, even they killed them, and some of them died under torture. So people started demonstrating against that. This was the cause of the revolution. For 40 years in Syria was dictatorship, and from father was 30 years, and Bashar, the son, another 10 years dictatorship, corruptions, and the rest of the world was watching, doing nothing about that. Regarding being multicultural, multi-religious, we are multicultural city, country, and multi-religious, of course. We respect that, and we want that to happen in the future. But that was a mistake about Bashar propaganda. For example, we have the Kurds. The Kurds, they don't have passports. They don't have ID cards, they don't have passports, and the Kurds are not allowed to build their own schools or to talk their own language. So for Bashar al-Assad to say, I am okay, open, moderate, multicultural, multi-religious, was absolutely misunderstanding about the regime. The regime was corrupt regime, dictatorship for 40 years. They put a lot of people in prison, they killed people in prison. And regarding the Christians, we say, okay, the Christians, we live in Syria for a long time together, for many hundred years, thousands of years, Christians and Muslims together. Never happened. We go back to Aleppo. And Aleppo was a big part of Aleppo under the state control. In that area was Christian minority still there. No one touched the Christians. I challenge anyone to tell me the Christian was mistreated by the FSA inside Syria. So to say, we're not going to see that in the future, I think that's wrong. Syria will be always multicultural, multi-ethnic, and the Syrian people, they accept that. Do not take the extremist views because as extremists do not represent the Syrian people. They came from outside countries, they are jihadists, they represent their own narrow views about life and the future of Syria. We are the Syrian people, we decide what kind of future we need in the future, for Syria in the future. So the idea about the regime was multicultural, multi-ethnic, that's absolutely wrong. And everyone inside Syria knows that. I want Syria in the future, of course, I want Syria multicultural, multi-religious. We have Syria like Muzi, many religious, many ethnic background, and we are happy with that. But we're not going to allow some extremists, foreign extremists to dictate our future. We will decide our future.
You agree, Boštjan?
Yeah, mostly. And I'm always scared of this multicultural and multi-religious argument in the Syrian context. It really reminds me how Western media reported in the first 12 or 18 months from ex-Yugoslavian conflicts. Oh, this country, was multicultural, let's keep it as it is. Yeah, but you have a war criminal, you have a genocidario, Slobodan Milošević, ready to kill hundreds of thousands of people, in the name of nationalism, which is a direct consequence of enforced multiculturalism. And in my opinion, a very similar thing is right now happening in Syria. And Bashar al-Assad is not a face of multiculturalism. It's a face of hardcore sectarian violence.
One of the casualties of war is always the truth. So who would you say, Darko, is now winning this propaganda war in Syria? Is it Bashar al-Assad, are the rebels, or the victims?
Well, definitely the current government has more tools to use the propaganda machine because they are more sophisticated and they have more knowledge on how to control the media. I mean, there was never freedom of press or freedom of speech in Syria. I mean, maybe
But
a long time ago, but not for the last 50 years. So, as in some other countries where, like during Saddam and Iraq or many other countries, they have the system, they control media, all the local media are state controlled, where you're a foreigner, you want to report from Syria, you're under control, you're not actually able to independently report. So, government is definitely, for the moment, for the last some time, it's been this side, because from one side you have the Islamists who took over generally control in the north. FSA is fragmented, they can't even find somebody to represent them. So this the foreign fighters, foreign regime who are fighting, they definitely don't help the FSA with anything related to the spreading of truth. So yeah, for the moment, the Assad's government is winning in terms of that.
Is this also because, in a way, Assad is protecting the journalists because this way you know who you're dealing with when you're embedded with the government, let's say?
It's a direct consequence of the policy of Western countries and the impotence of the international community. And this is also a sign of media awareness. In the time when it was still possible to freely report from the north, the narration was definitely owned by the rebellion, by the rebels. when it became too dangerous. It became very opportunistic to go to Damascus and report the story from there. And this is not journalism.
Unfortunately, a lot of journalists keep going there and getting stories out, following the regime propaganda and not representing the truth what's happening. And I'm really calling about all the international media to just be honest and not to report from the government side as long as they are not free to report. So why you go to report the government side if you are not free to report or to write whatever you want, and all the time you have intelligence with you to tell you what to do, where to go? Why the international media keep going there? I don't understand. And I think that's injustice for the human being.
Because they can.
Because?
Because they can. They go there because they can.
Yes, but if you go there and you know you are not free to write or to report, why you go?
I want to go to both sides.
So you.
But if I cannot operate in the rebel control areas, okay, I go to the sides.
So you are agreed to just report on one side. It's okay.
I don't support any side. I report.
Not to report from one side.
I report from available side. I reported from both sides. When it was possible for me to report from the rebel control areas, I was there. I reported from there. I was sending pictures out. Okay.
But now you cannot go to the other side. So you report from one side what they tell you to do.
No. It's not like that. I mean,
what is it?
It's not that black and white. Okay. When you go to Damascus and you want to do the story, it's not like they serve you their facts.
Are you free to do whatever you want?
I'm not free to do whatever I want, but I'm able to do independently what I want in the area where I'm able to operate. I don't,
But then you can go whatever they want. They will take you. You're not allowed to go whatever you want. So they'll take you to the right spot. So you write about their side of the story.
They don't take me anywhere. I go on my own.
You don't know.
I go on my own. I drive my own car.
Okay.
Okay. I do have a permission from the Ministry of
And you have to
Information.
report to them when you want to go.
There is a minder with me. That's right.
Okay.
But that minder can be bribed. You give him $100. He says, okay, do whatever you want. Okay? Like everybody else in Syria, with bucks we can do everything.
You used to bribe our same, we used to go to the other side. Did you bribe the other side?
I mean, you can't call it bribe, but
No,
I stayed.
Did you bribe the same when you go to the other side?
Yes. Okay, guy, take me to Aleppo. Oh, it's dangerous. Well, I'll give you $300. Take me to Aleppo.
That's your fixer,
That was
not
cheap.
that same. That's your fixer, not that same. Not the government, not the different.
It doesn't matter.
No, that's the authority. You bribe the authority in Damascus, but you're not bribing the authority in the say
Sometimes
something.
you have to pay the price.
That's
Okay, you bribe the government man. That's how
Okay,
it
look,
works.
but not the authority when they have say control. That's
I'm
different.
not saying that FSA are bad guys.
No.
God forbid. And I was happy to be there with FSA guys, and I had a friend and who I paid him to be my fixer. I didn't have to pay government. I just paid the miner.
That's their man.
Right, the miner.
Their man.
I mean, let's accept this, I mean, journalists who cover conflicts we all accept the rules of so-called war economy. We are part of it. And it would be extremely hypocritical to say that we don't bribe people. We do. And I mean, even paying fixers a bit too much is bribing. I mean, we do a lot of things for our stories.
I understand that. But our revolution to get rid of corruption, as I say, get bribe, to get the story out, that's a totally different story. When you bribe your fixer, that's another story.
Yeah, but it's not only about fixers. Oof, I'm going to show you the jail for $50, This is what happened to me in Alba.
That's not the policy of the FSA, that's the policy of one guy, not the government. The government's different.
There is
You
no-
bribe
It's not the
people.
government, it was the rebels last September in Alba, in the prison. Give me some money, I'm going to show the prisoners.
MaryAnne, you have something to
No, I was just
add.
going to say that we have a very hard time covering all of these conflicts, and I remember during the beginning of the Iraq War, we had journalists that were working in Baghdad, and they were under the ministry, and then we had journalists who were working from Kuwait, coming in with the American military. So with each of the reports, we gave an introductory, like in italics, at the beginning of the story, this journalist is working with the Ministry of Information. You know, this journalist is signed the agreement of the United States military to be embedded with this. So we are completely transparent with the reader, that the reader understands these are the conditions of this journalist working in this place. And we have the same problem with the materials coming out through wire services for Syria, because if it's a Syria government release, then we have to say, and this we cannot independently confirm the accuracy of this caption information because it was provided by. So we'll use the image and literally say to the reader, be careful at what you're looking at here because it's not independently reported. And with the materials coming out of Aleppo for a while, or like sort of the front lines where the snipers and people are working between buildings and in the rubble, we have to be very careful checking with the wire service. Who is the photographer? What is the circumstance the photographer is working under before we publish the images? We're very, very careful not to say, this is the way it is because we don't have an independent confirmation. Sana also releases, Sana service releases, this is an obtained video or an obtained still from the Sana news service from say a Syrian government attack or a rebel attack. And with that, again, we generally say this is this is coming from the news service in Syria and can't be independently confirmed.
The reason I said about that and mentioned something. For example, the New York Times magazine, they reported about a Tawhid brigade that's an Islamist brigade. Everyone who knows anything about the Syrian revolution knows that Tawhid is not an Islamist. And when this kind of sentence goes to the president and read it, okay, Tawhid brigade is an Islamist brigade, that tells the whole story, how to deal with it. And a lot of things like that happen. It's not only another journalist who wrote about, okay, we train people, 14 years old boys, to become fighters. Where I went back and checked the whole area where it was totally wrong and totally not true. I went to all the schools in the north of Syria to check out about this story, and then I found out it wasn't true. It was just, he wanted to write interesting stories, so he made it up and he wrote it. And that
Who was
just,
that journalist working for?
that journalist, he was working for AFP. He was working for AFP. And a lot of stories like that. What was mentioned before about being, for the media, they have 5,000 people that work on the media every day, the government side. 5,000 people working on the media for the government. On our side, few people, and most of them, they don't know English or don't know anything about journalism. And because of that, we lost a war of media. The Syrian Revolution lost the war of media. And unfortunately, the government released a lot of extremists, and these extremists, they follow orders from the government, so they kidnap journalists, and they now no journalists goes inside Syria. That policy was formed by the government and worked on by the government, so now we have no journalists reporting about the revolution anymore on the free side.
Unfortunately,
Can I just add something?
Okay, yeah.
Lots of these people who were released from the prisons were very active in Iraq between 2004 and 2007 and were sent there directly by the president.
Exactly. 962 of them being extremists being released, and they are working now on the government behalf.
I'm sorry, but we are running out of time. So we'll continue at the coffee place, but still, I would like last comments from all of you. And the question is Syrian war still a front page story after 3 years?
Just one thing, sorry to talk too much. But there was a peak of interest connected to chemical weapons, not to the use of conventional weapons and the bombardment going on all the time. And one refugee told me in Rehante in September, you know what's the difference between conventional weapons and the chemical weapons? It's simple. There is no blood when it's chemical weapons. And this is the biggest fault of the media.
Darko, your experience?
No special effects.
For me, it looks like the conflict is going to continue in a similar way like this for a couple of more years until the the destruction of the society and the infrastructure and everything else reaches the point where when the system is going to just collapse. And then, you know, there will be interested sides who are going to be working on rebuilding the society from scratch and making some new Syria in the future that is going to look like, you know, it's going to be probably a democratic country in a way like Libya maybe now, or Iraq perhaps, so we'll see.
New democracy. MaryAnne, for your paper.
I think it's getting harder to have it as a front page story unless you've got excellent independent reporting. As I said, we have a bureau chief who works in Turkey, and occasionally she'll come up with a great story where she's working with a group and she can confirm, say, a weapons transfer, or the fact that they're Turkish officials working to provide access at non-border crossings for Syrian refugees to pass. When they closed the border officially, she did a story where there was one area where they were still allowing Syrian refugees in, but unofficially. You see what I mean? It's not condoned by the government, but they're turning their face and letting the refugees still pass across the border. As I said, we have a big story that's not yet published, that's going to be published in the first week of December, where we spent 1 month reporting on the refugee situation in the neighboring countries. They can't support this many people in the neighboring countries, and so there's both international aid to help with the refugee situation, but there's also anger locally that a lot of the help, instead of going to the local people in some of the poorer areas, is going to the refugees instead of the people who live there. So there's anger towards the Syrian refugees in some of these areas. And that's more, rather than the internal conflict where we can't independently report what's happening, which groups are controlling the rebel areas. So it is becoming harder to keep it on the front page. We do stories on Syria several times a week. Any information that we can obtain independently, trying to keep the public aware that the war is still going on. But it's difficult, as you can hear from the journalists who are working on the ground, especially to bring news from the rebel areas.
For you, Mr. Nasser?
I'd like just to say the Syrian revolution is really mistreated by the international community. The Syrian people being mistreated by the international community. After they made the chemical deals, no one cares about Syria anymore, not even the politicians. So they allow the regime to kill people as much as they want. Shelling, racketing, helicopters, bombs, whatever. So as long as they get their chemical deals, and everyone knows now, after the dirty chemical deals, no one cares about Syria anymore. And really that's a shame for the international community, where people fight for their freedom and democracy, and they get no help from anybody. And sometimes when we see children, so far like 11,000 children being killed, 12,000 women being killed, pregnant women being targeted by snipers and killed, and no one really cares anymore. It has to do with our what kind of future we need. Who cares about democracy or freedom, or we care about business and stability? And this is a really hard question we have to keep asking ourselves. Do we care about freedom and democracy, or we care about stability and business and money?
Thank you. I'm sure there are some comments or questions in the audience. So please stand up if somebody has a question for our guests. Yeah?
You all emphasized how complex the situation in Syria is right now, and I'm just like, it's not a two-sided conflict. And my question is, why is it sometimes so hard to read this complexity from the media? Why is there not, for example, a lot of coverage on what's happening in the Kurdish part of Syria, like Rojava and all those horrible stories? is it just not possible for the journalists to do that, or is there like too little interest in general public?
Who is your question?
I don't know, for whoever.
Anybody want to answer?
Regarding reporting from inside, because a lot of journalists in Syria, it's multi-ethnic, multi-religious. If you want to go to report about the Kurds, you have to understand the story of the Kurds inside Syria. After that, you report about the Kurds. Just go first, visit the Kurds area for a couple hours does not make you understand what the Kurds are all about. So we need professional journalists, they know the background so they can report about that. Like some of them really good and they know, like for example, Der Spiegel magazine, you have some reporters, they know all the history of the minorities inside Syria. So they can go and report. The guy from the New York Times, Mr. Chris Shivers, is very known, very knowledgeable, so he can report. You need kind of journalists like that to report about what's going on inside Syria in details.
On the other hand, it's not easy to do these stories. I mean, to report on the Kurdish story, it's exactly what Yasser said. You have to know the story rather well. And the Kurdish story is not a Kurdish story, it's a regional story. And to come there, it was easy, as it was in the north last year. But right now, it's rather complex, very dangerous. And on the other hand, when the Kurdish story was present in the media, the reason to be present in the media was because the area was accessible. It was not the huge empathy towards the Kurds. It was the opportunism of the media again, because it was possible, as Darko said, we do this story because we can do this story. You know, it was an open area. Now it's not anymore. Not because of the clashes only, but because of the policy of the Iraqi government in the north, and also because the Kurdish fighters are now much more aggressive than they were in the last 18 months.
I think you'll find that it's not unique to Syria. I've been working with reporters and photographers working in conflict zones here in the Balkans, in Chechnya, in Iraq, in all these different, when you see these stories coming out, that is the situation. The reporters who are working in these areas are working from the area that they have access to. So if they can get access from the government side, they'll go to the government side. If they can get access from the rebel side, they'll go to the rebel side. It's very unusual, as in your case, Darko, that you've been able to cover from both sides with no issues. Because sometimes if say a photo reporter had worked from the rebel side, then the government would deny a visa to that journalist to go to the other side. They say, oh, they won't tell the proper story because they're friends of the rebels. And we have this problem in every conflict situation of trying to be able to tell the whole story by bringing a report from each side or from a minority group. For instance, the Post this summer did a story on the Alawites, smaller community, to say what are they fighting for? If there's a part of the revolution that is an Alawite revolution, and we reported from 3 different countries what the situation is, what the hope would be, as you would do with the Kurds, because the Kurds have different areas that they control as minority without having their own state. So I think that those stories are more complicated and harder for the readers to understand.
Something else? No? Then thank you. Thank you everybody for your comments.
There's somebody.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Can you stand up? I can't see.
My question goes to my question goes to Mr. Yasser. When we read about the rebels, let's say in Western media, we have in mind that there is a Syrian national coalition safely based outside the country. But when you talk about rebels, who do you mean? Who are they now? What is happening with rebels right now?
The rebels, if you went to Syria 1 year ago, was like 95 or 97% of them Syrians. 18 to 20, 25 years old guys going to fight for Syria, to liberate Syria. If it goes now to Syria, maybe 90% or 85% are Syrians, the rest are foreigners. So They come from Libya, from Tunisia, from Morocco, from different countries. And the longer this fight goes on, more extremes going to happen inside. And it will be worse for everyone, not only for us, but for you. The danger is not will be limited to Syria. But in general, up to now, maybe we can find a solution with it. But if it goes on for 2 more years or 3 more years, forget it. We're going to have 50% foreigners. It's 120,000 Syrian died, most of them soldiers. So who will fight the government? The government keep getting people from Iraq, from Hezbollah, from Iraq, to fight on their behalf. Who will fight on our behalf? We have no man left. So the longer this fight goes on, the conflict goes on, it will be bad for everyone.
Anybody else? Okay.
Can I just add something? Special thanks goes to Mateo Leskašek, the spiritual father of this panel.
Thank you very much. So I invite you for the coffee. We can continue the debate, the questions you don't dare to ask in public. Thank you very much. See you.